Hello, parish orphans and retrogrades. Timothy Gordon here with the second inaugurating show from my new place in beautiful Mississippi. I am here tonight with a couple of the boys, Mr. Chris Plance and Mr. Richard DeClue, after these fellas came out with quite a substantial and substantive video in response to Taylor Marshall after he responded to the ostensible errors of Vatican II. And of course, that chased down the weeks of dialogue about Vatican II, compounded by the Archbishop Vigano letter, Philippic, whatever you want to call it, on Vatican II, and the Archbishop Schneider one. Lots of interesting food for thought. Vatican II is one of those things that, well, we just have to talk about. And I wanted to invite Chris and Richard on tonight to tell them I informed something of a midpoint between their view and Taylor Marshall's. And so I wanted to give their view a fair hearing. I agree with a lot of the particular points they made, probably disagree with a lot of the generalities that are mandated by those particulars. In other words, the interpretation, what is required by those facts of the four or five sacred documents they talked about. Nevertheless, what's up, Chris and Richard? Thanks for coming on with me, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to be back on ever since I got kicked off. So
kicked off. You left because
no, don't
such
start.
A little baby.
All right, guys, let's shake hands and come out fighting. Come on.
Why doesn't everybody want to know what happened to C. Plance and T. Gord?
Yeah, no, I know. You get a lot of speculation about TNT, what happened there, and people when you left, Chris, people were like, "What's up with Chris Plance?" Okay. I'm just kidding. I've gotten a lot of questions.
Your guy on, and yeah.
No, people care. People were broken up. They were tearing up a little bit behind their glands. It's cool, man. I got a lot of questions about it, legitimately. And even Dave, everyone's asking where Dave's been. He's been very busy since he's working for Church Militant, or he would be on with us as well. Seriously, I want to get into it with you guys because you guys did this video responding to, I think you called it, Taylor Marshall's errors on Vatican II. He'd done a video, Vatican II's errors, or something like that. And I get rhetorically what you're saying, and that there's some real substance to back up the charge you make. And I want to talk about a couple of those tonight, but I want to say, what did that video run, 3 or 4 hours? 4.5 hours director's cut, right? Yeah, it was a long video.
It was over 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, yeah.
It was 2 hours. And you started out, you guys had preliminary thoughts, and it was like the preliminary thoughts went 45 minutes and
50, yeah.
50. And that's the only area I disagreed with you, which means that we're going to rush through these 12 points I had, points of departure in the first 45 minutes of that video. And I think a lot of people will watch this because of the title and the topics of the title and the names involved by the title. But what I wanted to say is I disagreed a lot in the first 45 minutes, and then the last hour and a half or whatever remained, the last 6.5 hours of your video.
The substance of it?
Yeah, the substance of it. Particulars, when you're going through the sacred documents from Vatican II, joking aside, you just did your homework well, which a lot of whatever you want to call them, the tradies, do not do, right? They're kind of, let me just say this at the beginning and then kick it to Richard and then Chris. But most importantly, Richard. Just kidding, Chris.
But seriously. The dialogue that is not had in the, whatever you want to call it, the post-conciliar Vatican II church, the Novus Ordo church, as some of the tradies call it, the dialogue that is peculiarly refused, is really mirrored in the traditional church, right? It's very hard to have dialogue there. So if you call out any of these guys and you're like, I'm not a Novus Ordo-ite or whatever, I'm not a trad, I'm my own man, and I'm calling it as I see it. The way I think all three of us are kind of in that area. Chris might be a little more enthusiastically pro Novus Ordo, but I don't know. Then the dialogue is really refused, isn't it? It's a cold, desolate sort of abomination. It's a place where you're all alone if you just want to critically assess the constitutions of various councils and go from there, ain't it?
Yeah, I mean, I find it difficult to dialogue with some traditionalists about it because they think if I defend them, I'm automatically someone who's in favor of Pachamama idols, and it's hard to have a conversation that way,
right?
You know, because I try to stick to specific points on specific texts and those problems, but it's usually, I find when people want to talk about it, it's more generalities. Just, well, since the council, the X, Y, or Z happened and that was bad, ergo. And
right,
that's not how I evaluate claims.
Precisely. Yeah, Chris, anything to add to that?
I think to that last concern. I mean, this is why I said there are a lot of people that like the traditional Latin Mass, think it's better, and don't agree with many of these supposedly rad trads that want to throw out the council. What I said in the video was someone needs to step up to the plate and carve out a new sort of be the leader of sort of a new, although that sounds kind of weird, but sort of carve out
like a new cult where there's you pay to get in. There are followers, polyamorous, right? Is that where you're going with this?
Have your own building and you meet behind a curtain and
right.
No, but
several levels, 33 degrees. No, go ahead.
I was thinking of Matt Frad. You know, he likes the traditional Matt, although he's Byzantine. But like Tim, now that I think about it, and I'm looking at you and the skull behind you, I'm thinking like maybe, I mean, because you've been in this. I mean, you kind of aren't really all the way there with the traditionalists. You get criticized by the traditionalists. You think the Novus Ordo is valid. You accept the Second Vatican Council, even though you think the ambiguities were intentional and stuff like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of people. I got contacted by a lot of people when I was on when I was on your show for about a month before I get charged with heresy. And
I want you to still be on the show, so I don't know what you're talking about. But whatever. People are going to get the wrong idea.
No. No, but and I got contacted by a lot of people that like, hey man, I'm kind of with you. I don't really want to go all the way sort of where T Marsh is going with SSPX and stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of people like that, but they don't, I mean, there's not really someone I think giving them a voice out there. So I think someone like you or Matt Frad can give them that voice. And I think you do. I honestly think you do, which is why you sort of been sidelined, Tim, by maybe many of the trads because, you know, you wear a t-shirt or something.
Well, hold on. There's a lot of emotive language in there, as much substance as it is. And I don't really want to do like a 45-minute intro. That your guys' video had a long intro, and I want to get down to the points. But you used a lot of emotive language, Chris. You said there are people like me that think the Latin Mass is better. Okay, objectively, I think it's fair to say no, it's better. The metrics are all there and support the idea that the TLM is better. It's pretty much a product of natural reason, which are some of the pushback, which is the justification behind some of the pushbacks I'm going to give you in the next 12 points here. Natural reason dictates objectively the TLM is just a lot more sacred. It's up against any version of the Novus Ordo. You also said that, but I'm on the other hand one of the people that says that I think Vatican II is valid, or I think the Novus Ordo is valid. That also is a matter of hardcore fact, right, as a function of the indefectibility of the church. The Novus Ordo, even though it's, I think, objectively inferior, I know objectively inferior, the Novus Ordo is 100% valid, and Vatican II must be 100% valid, or else the sedes are right. So the principle of the excluded middle is a logical principle and a logistical principle that dictates that this position where you are like, well, the church is indefectible, but one of the ecumenical councils isn't really ecumenical. That doesn't work. And so, and then I would also say, Matt Frad has all the integrity in the world. He's a friend. He's a good guy. His and he's just got a lot of integrity. I like him a lot. His project is a different project, though, from carving a strong new middle path between Novus Ordo Church, which isn't a thing, and traditionalism, which really isn't a thing. Kind of like, remember when Milo said lesbians are fictional or something like that? It's kind of like there is no two churches. There's just, so I'm not even carving the middle path. I'm just showing how there is no distinction. It's a false dichotomy, a false bifurcation, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, I'm there already, and I hope lots of people come to see TLM is objectively better, but it's a false dichotomy when we say the Novus Ordo Church versus the traditional church. Any final thoughts on that, Richard, Chris?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, I would probably nuance a little bit differently when I say which one is better. If we're talking metaphysically, they're the same. Like, they're the same sacrifice. So essentially, they're the same thing. Where they differ, you could say, is in so instead of the essential difference, you have the accidentals, right? Sure. So which one in the appearance, in the exterior accidentals, more fully expresses the mystery that is really present in each. So I don't think there's an essential difference where one is essentially better than the other, because the sacrifice of Christ is what gives both of them their intrinsic infinite value. So the question, when you talk about one mass versus the other, I would say it has more to do with the appropriateness or the fittingness, the suitability of the accidental part, the part that is the exterior manifestation.
Well, ad fortiori, this makes all the more useless the distinction, the two iterations of one rite, doesn't it? I mean, let's just jump into the thing. That really makes the distinction made in 1964 or whatever, Sacrosanctum Concilium, 1963, all the more futile, especially when we look, not as consequentialists, but as just good scientists. We look at the actual metrics for what the pastoral effects of said distinction was for the new Mass. It makes it, I like your distinction. They are accidental differentia. Nevertheless, why make them when they're less effective pastorally? But
no, that's very good. That's a valid point.
That's the whole idea behind a pastoral council. By the way, people, I'm going to say this once, but I'm just going to jump into it here. My points of departure with Richard and Chris from their video, and then we're going to go through really like machine gun style the ways that really traditionalists are mistaken about the sacred constitutions themselves. And I couldn't disagree with Richard and Chris if I tried. But the generalizations that they made, I'm going to run through right now. But I'm just going to say this once. Vatican II is not the only pastoral council, my friends. Vatican II is like the third or fourth ecumenical council out of 21, depending on how you count it, that made no dogmatic definitions, that anathematized no heresies. It's not the first one. There is a way, I think we're going to disagree on this, me, Richard, Chris. There is a way or two in which Vatican II is sui generis. It is of its own kind. It's of the first kind, but it is not predicated of that category. It is not sui generis insofar as there were other medieval councils that anathematized zero heresies and dogmatically defined zero orthodoxies. So that's just one of those trad talking points that I said for 2 or 3 years, and then I found out it's not true. And I have this penchant for research. So do Richard and Chris. And when you have a penchant for research, you're just like, wow, I've been saying this stuff as a semi-trad or whatever I am, and I'm just wrong, and I don't like being wrong. So I correct myself. Yeah. And there are literally 2 or 3 other ones in the medieval church. So let's just jump into it. And you guys, I think, pointed that out in your video. Okay, so either of you just let's run through these, like 3 minutes per point here, if we can keep it there. Richard or Chris, either of you, in whatever order, whoever feels more strongly about it, like blink your eyes hard or something, or pass out and let the other one clearly have the floor. You caution at the very beginning of your video, and I disagree with this, and I'll say why very quickly, against a tempting that Marshall made, and I guess in these points I'm defending Marshall's point of view. You caution against a, quote, tempting by the traditionalists against the urgings of Saint Popes. And you say that it represents a kind of Protestant convert spirit versus a Catholic spirit of obedience, which I like that. I do like that, and I think there's much to be spoken about here. There is a role, because in the 90s and the early 2000s, all of the thought leaders, particularly the lay thought leaders in the Catholic Church, were these converts from Protestantism, and they bring their own charism, and there are almost no cradle Catholics who are thought leaders. And cradle Catholics get the obedience point. It's one of our charisms because it's more genetic. It's more passed through generations in our blood to understand obedience, even when sui generis Vatican II is probably the most confusing of all the councils, hands down. But what I don't like is when you're saying that, well, these are saint popes, and it's an appeal to authority that's always very weak. I'm a philosopher, not a theologian, as lots of my haters point out. And so you say it's tempting of Taylor Marshall to raise ostensible weaknesses of Vatican II because the saint popes say otherwise. I don't like that point because I don't think you have to pray and wring your hands and do all this stuff. I think you need to check your facts. I don't think this is a question of prayer. You need to check your facts, make sure you have the documents right. But I don't think there's anything wrong in speaking the truth. The Catholic Church is all about the natural reason as well as obedience. And the whole point is that we're never asked to obey something that contradicts the natural reason. There's some really close calls in the documents. So I think you're dangerously flirting with a kind of almost unjust appeal to authority there. Did you want to just address that, either of you?
Well, I mean, I would say I don't necessarily agree with the distinction there about natural reason, because when you're talking about doctrinal teaching, you're talking about supernatural. You're not talking about natural reason. We're not talking about a debate about some philosophical point that happens to be in the text. You're talking about magisterial teaching that is binding on the faithful. And my point was not that, these popes who were saints and canonized said that they're good. My point was that the church established by Christ authentically, with its magisterium, taught these things. And what I'm saying is that if you're struggling with understanding them, and you're having a hard time seeing what they're saying as true or consistent with the past, that there's good ways and there's bad ways of dealing with it. And the reality of it is, let's say, what's the point of doing a video on YouTube that thousands or maybe even 1 million people might see that is actually trying to convince people that the magisterium taught error? Like, is it necessary for salvation for a Catholic to believe Taylor Marshall's critique that they are erroneous, or is someone more in danger of losing salvation by beginning to doubt the authority of the church and her magisterium?
Well, that's sort of a red herring, though. I said I wouldn't jump into it. Because the principle of non-contradiction. When there's a clear contradiction in the prior teaching of the church with Vatican II. Vatican II document really flirts with some contradictions. Ultimately, it does not contradict itself, but it was intentionally made to look like maybe a contradiction. So when someone falls for the pitfall that they were kind of, it was designed to be there, like a traditionalist, like Marshall goes for, they call Islam. They worship, the Mohammedans worship the one God. Well, we don't have the article, the definite article "the" in Latin. So it could either be they argue one God or the one God. Now, Marshall does add the word "true," which makes the Vatican II document sound extra egregious. That's Chris's point. He pointed that out to me. Totally fair criticism. But they're playing on this definite article that doesn't exist in Latin. So do Muslims worship one God? Yes. Or do they worship the one God That sounds more like it's a function of natural reason, because it contradicts clear Catholic teaching for the first 1900 years of the church. That's not a function of supernatural reason.
It doesn't contradict. As a matter of fact, like I was telling you about Ed Fazer's article, he argues the exact opposite. He says, according to natural reason, Muslims and Christians and Jews do worship the one God because they agree on God's because you can't know God's essence directly. You only know him from his effects. That God is the source of all being. That he is the creator, who is the ultimate good. And all of those natural. If you were to put the natural Aquinas' 5 ways, right, the 5 proofs for God's existence, in front of a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim, they'd all agree that yes, that's God.
Right.
So from natural reason, they do refer to the same reality. So no, on the natural plane, and that is what the document's point was, because it's making this.
Well, but in the 92 Catechism and in the Vatican's own English translation, they add the one true God, and with the distinction that Richard's talking about is in the Fazer article, the dichotomy between sense and reference. So, right, we can be talking about one God, and the Muslims would agree, and the Jews would agree. Now, their attribution, because sense is different, reference is the same. We might attribute basically. I think you'd agree, Richard, demonic or even just 180 degrees wrong principles if we're Muslim, whereas the Jews are wrong in some ways, right in other ways. The Christians are 100% right. But that's a pitfall. And nevertheless, we're reasoning about it with our natural reason. And you're kind of taking, you're not all wrong. I'm not saying you are here, but you're taking Marshall to task here for kind of falling for the head fake that the modernists at the council, who really represented the muscle there, they wanted everyone to fall for, right? So just, I think Marshall, to be fair, Marshall's just saying a lot of people are going for this and now thinking under the kind of new paradigm of ecumenism that we just have to say that the Muslims worship the one God under the right headings, which is not correct, right? To be a little bit precise here, ecumenism refers to dialogue between Christians. Amongst Christians. Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So interreligious dialogue is between Christians and non-Christians. So no, I don't. There is no article in Latin. That is true. Fazer's article, he does use the term "the same God." So he goes even further than the document.
Because you have to, because it's in the Catechism, it's in the Vatican, it's in the Sacred Constitution in English.
My argument is not really based on whether or not there's the article. I found it an interesting discussion on the Latin and what it says in the document, because I do think the ultimate question, because they are distinct. It's an interesting question, and it would be nice to have some clarification, but I don't think it's erroneous. I mean, there's even that the letter. Now, technically, is it a magisterial text? No, it was a letter by a Pope Saint who wrote a letter to a Muslim sultan. But even he said that, right?
Well, Chris,
we worship God daily.
Yeah, I don't want to litigate the whole issue as to the one true God. They Muslims definitely worship one God. And when you go through a really technical paper like Ed Fazer's, after the fact of the very intentionally misleading Vatican document, that after this technical paper, which treats of it by someone smart like Fazer, an analytic philosopher, who's really the best person to do the job, I think, at that point, yes, he says, okay, the document is rescued. The document does not technically contradict itself, even though ostensibly most people are, because I'm a textualist. So the original public meaning of this seems to contradict and had the clear intent of contradicting earlier teachings. The church had no problem before saying Muslims don't worship our God, right?
Did they? I've not seen that. I mean, I don't
want to litigate the whole thing, but they're really, the language is really pejorative about the belief system of the Muslims.
Yeah, the belief system,
consistently.
Absolutely.
Well, this is the pinnacle of their belief system. So we're not litigating so much whether or not it's true, because we agree. Ultimately, this is not a contradiction. I'm just saying that I think, Chris, I want to hear from this because Marshall does add the word "the one" bracket true God, and you're the one that pointed that out. This is nowhere in the Vatican documents, and that really is what Luther did. He's adding a word, and it's making it a much more egregious, stinky, putrid offense against textualism, which is unfair. So it's the one God, not the one true God. Nevertheless, I think I disagree with both you guys and the traditionalists, because I believe in the hermeneutic of continuity. Hermeneutic does not mean description or self-evidence. Right? It's not the description of continuity. A hermeneutic is an interpretive aid that is only needed when water is muddy, when textual water is muddy, if I can extend the metaphor. So by Ratzinger admitting that we need a hermeneutic of continuity, he's admitting that the council was sui generis, that it's implied intentionally muddy water here, that you need an interpretive aid. That's what a hermeneutic is. So a lot of the people, Chris, I want to hear from you on this. A lot of people in the JP2, whatever you want to call it, church, post-conciliar, mainstream church, they think, oh, hermeneutic of continuity. That just means there's self-evident continuity. No, it doesn't. A lot of tradies think that if you endorse the hermeneutic of continuity, which I am, I'm writing a book this summer. I believe in the hermeneutic of continuity. That means that there's self-evident continuity. No, they actually have the same view. Look up the word hermeneutic. It means an interpretive aid that's needed for Vatican II, but no other councils.
I don't agree with that.
Well, Chris, what's up? What's up, Chris?
Well, DeClue, go ahead and address that last point, and then I'll give my 2 cents.
The Council of Nicaea used the term hypostasis in a completely different way than all of the following Christological councils.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about.
No, but a hermeneutic of continuity had to be applied when they changed the term of hypostasis to show that, okay, the way it's used in Nicaea is different than the way it's used in later councils.
No, that's not what we mean by a hermeneutic.
It is.
An interpretive aid. An interpretive aid is not, hey, we have to look at this text a couple times extra and get into the Greek. That's not what we're doing when we apply the hermeneutic of continuity. It means we literally bracket certain parts of certain texts in Vatican II, and we say, tie goes to the runner, tie goes to magisterium. It is, man. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, you're using the term.
So what, Tim, sorry, what was the exact question that you were asking me specifically again?
Well, one thing we agree on here is Taylor and a lot of the traditionalists use the talking point that the Vatican II document says that the Muslims believe in the one true God. True puts it beyond all belief.
Yeah.
Beyond any doubt, and that's unfair.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. I mean, I thinking about what Richard said in our video, like, okay, maybe actually Taylor did see it as a rhetorical device, but he said it so many times you almost get the impression excuse me. You almost get the impression, or at least it gives the impression to people, that the text actually says the one true God. My point was just merely that, okay, hold up real quick. If Taylor's gonna argue on the basis that, well, it seems like they're basically saying it's insinuating it's there in the text so we can add true, then that's unfair. And it's exactly it's the same thing that happened with Luther. Luther was trying to justify putting alone in the text in Romans because he said, well, it just means faith alone, faith apart from everything else. That's what it communicated. That's what he thought the text communicated. But really, it was just faith apart from ergonomu, works of the law. That's different from saying faith alone apart from everything, apart from love, apart from the other virtues and stuff like that. So my point was only that if he argues on that ground, which is that's the ground by which he says we can put true in the text, then I would just be like, it's the same situation with Luther. That's my own point. And you can't put it in the text. It just says Muslims worship one God. If we want to be literal, if we want to go with the English transliteration, the one God. But you can't add true there, even if you think that's basically what it's saying.
Right. It's taking an unfair shortcut. Yeah, I couldn't disagree with that if I tried. Let's kick the hermeneutic point down below because it'll come up a few times. Second point, you guys say, I forget who it was, whether it was Richard or Chris. You say Archbishop Vigano can say, can articulate the critiques that he did of the council, and he might still be partly wayward or whatever, but not a layman like Taylor. And if you're gonna do this, you need a spiritual director. I would just say no. Both the canon law and the catechism urge us in clear cases of error to, that we may, like Paul rebuking Peter, go to our prelates and say, hey, Your Eminence or Your Excellency or whatever, this is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean they're automatically right, but except I don't agree that I guess with this high standard of you have to be 100.0 sure before you go to your prelate to cross-check him. You're allowed to do so, and if you're wrong, your prelate will come back at you and go, "No, check your bottom line in your math problem, buddy. You're wrong. Thank you for trying to correct me, though." I don't think this. I don't think this is a supernatural matter. I think it's just you're allowed to correct your prelate, and no one's ever 100% sure of anything in life. Maybe a mother's love, right? Mm-hmm. But except you guys were getting all into, you need a spiritual director and all this stuff. I'm like, no, they just Taylor might be wrong about some of this stuff. He might be right about some of this stuff, but you're making it sound like there's a whole lot of spiritual hand-wringing that should go into this. Whereas if he makes a video and it's wrong, you guys should just do a video and correct him without all the finger wagging. That's just my point. What do you say to that?
I don't think we made the point that you couldn't question your prelate. What we said was questioning and calling the magisterium erroneous to the wide world is the problem. So if you have I have no problem with someone going to a prelate and saying, "Hey, you're wrong on this," and then being corrected, or seeking correction, or saying, "Hey, I don't understand this. Explain it to me." I have no problem with that. And we said explicitly that in the video, that if you have problems with these things and are wondering, then you go to people in authority. You work on it. Like theologians talk among themselves about this. They don't misrepresent an ecumenical council publicly as a way of addressing it. That's what we were talking about.
Chris, you got anything there?
Well, yeah, I think it was my point that you're kind of addressing. It was only advice. I mean, I can't tell anybody what to do. I was just saying that my advice was to people. First of all, you should have a spiritual director in general, but
sure, but not for this. This isn't what you need it for. This is all natural reason. We're just reasoning, right, together.
Yeah, that's why we disagree. I mean, when you're calling into question, when you're doing something that Taylor's doing here specifically, I'm not saying, hey, you can't have a YouTube show and talk about Catholic stuff unless you have a spiritual director. First of all, I'm not making any. It was just a suggestion on my part that those Catholic YouTubers that are going to call into question the authority of an ecumenical council. I mean, it's kind of bold, right? You should at least consult someone holy or someone that you trust that is holy, that knows their stuff, before you go out and put it out there. And obviously you should pray about it.
Let me quote you to you here. You said, you might scandalize, which is true, by trying, I think this was Richard, by trying to foster hatred for magisterial documents. Of course, if we're not on the intentionalism kick, we don't know that he's trying to foster hatred. But I'm not that nitpicky. In general, my point, I really am about halfway between you guys, maybe a little bit closer to you, but I'm not trying to be halfway. Catholics need to stop moralizing to each other, Catholic laymen. It's the worst thing in the world. Everyone quit telling each other like what to do. That's kind of my general point. Let's just reason together and let the chips fall where they may. So I don't think he's trying to foster hatred for the document. Maybe he is. I don't know. They must, and saying that these documents must be wrong and I'm right. Well, if there's a clear contradiction, and I think you guys are ultimately right on the fact that the documents don't have a clear contradiction. They were, I'm writing a whole book on showing the intent of someone like Skilevix, according to Lefebvre, says, we're making them vague and we know what we're going to do with the vagueness later. We can talk about sacrosanctum concilium in these terms. We were talking a little before tapes rolled. So it's I think it's somewhat obvious to say, once we get into the details, there were pitfalls that were hardwired in intentionally, and whether people in the Catholic mainstream or a Catholic traditionalist kind of fall for them and then stop believing in the hermeneutic of continuity, I don't think that's necessarily trying to foster hatred. I mean, we can read the traditionalist point of view, Taylor's point of view, much more charitably and say, well, that because there was this intent, he's pretty much just doing what the framers of the docs, I read these things as a philosopher and as a lawyer, and these things clearly evince an intent, and the whole spirit of Vatican II theory clearly evinces a continuity between the ratification and the writing of the documents and the effectuation thereof, that say, really, this is what people are supposed to be thinking. They're supposed to be saying rupture. You almost have to be a doctor of the church to see that it's not rupture. So I'm just a little more charitable to him, I guess. And I don't think I don't know.
I don't know. I think there were a lot of people that were at the council that were directly involved in drafting the texts who didn't have that view. So no, I don't think it's obvious that that's the intent of the text. Ratzinger didn't think that was the intent of the text. And he was there for every single session. He wrote things that were actually proclaimed to the entire body. He helped draft a number of the texts. He didn't think that rupture was the point of the text. And but
he admits you need a hermeneutic, which is again.
Yeah, but that's
you don't need a hermeneutic for
a tool. A hermeneutic is also it's an interpretive principle, which is that it's an
interpretive aid. It's something you need. When I say, dude, I want an ice cream, you're like, you don't need a hermeneutic of any sort to understand. This guy is like got a hankering for a big pop.
No, but there's hermeneutic. There's proper hermeneutics for Scripture. It's not implying that there's a rupture. A hermeneutic is
no. A hermeneutic of continuity implies that without the hermeneutic, you will assume discontinuity.
No, I don't.
Hermeneutics in script, but when they're not in Scripture, they're not called hermeneutics of continuity. It's called hermeneutics. It's just an interpretive aid. When the name of the only way forward
that you have to use an interpretive tool that shows continuity, because that's
between the Vatican II and all the other councils, because it is sui generis in at least one way. It's the only one where there's so much ostensible discontinuity that you need a hermeneutic of continuity. We need a hermeneutic to know what are the signs, what are the covenants, what does sevenness mean, what do the sacraments mean, what does it mean to be perfect, to be complete in Scripture? Why are there 7 of all these things? We need hermeneutics there. For Vatican II, we need a hermeneutic of continuity, meaning without it, and I do believe in it, and the trads hate me for it. But it implies directly as one of Justice Scalia's canons of interpretation that without it, one will assume discontinuity. That's all I'm doing here is I'm saying we should be more charitable to the trads, I think. Because, whatever, I don't care. I don't really care if
assume discontinuity if you don't assume a hermeneutic of continuity. The opposite of continuity is discontinuity. So I think Ratzinger's reacting against people that have already assumed a specific hermeneutic, which is one of discontinuity, referencing SSPX and neo-modernists who have teamed up at least on that point. And so he's just saying that the opposite of that is continuity, which is a principle in which Catholics have assumed since 33 AD.
He's addressing intentionalists which are mostly the trads who look at the pretty clear bad intent of the muscle at the council and the shadow councils and all that. And he's also just saying, you read these documents, they sound way, way, way different. And so, no, really, the presumptive position is one of discontinuity, which is why you need the hermeneutic of continuity. Okay,
we're not going to agree on that. So it's just, Anyway, duly noted.
Okay, well, let me throw this analogy at you really quick, because my third point will go really fast. It goes just with the second one. But let me throw this at you, Richard. Me and Chris were talking about this earlier. If a jury gives a verdict over to a judge, right? And let's say that the verdict is not guilty. right? The jury is the council. Then the judge reads it and he changes it and he says guilty, right? And then the jury stands up and says, dude, no, we literally said not guilty. We said the opposite of that. And then the judge just kind of looks him off and says, bailiff, take this man into custody, right? And he's going to go serve his 25 to life. And then all of the creatures and the apparati of law and the entire legal system proceeds as if the jury wasn't standing up saying the judge reversed what we were saying. Then there is a clear, not 99%, 100% showing. There's a clear showing that the legal apparatus is favoring the judge over against the clear objections of the jury, right? And that's when we talk about sacrosanctum concilium, that's essentially what I don't want to call them Novus Ordoites because I just said I don't believe in that economy, but that's what the post-conciliar church is asking us to believe, dude. It's, hey, me, you, and you, all three of us say sacrosanctum concilium is pretty good. Go read the doc, trads. But the trads can say, okay, well then why in the hell are at least 49 out of 50 masses done in a completely desecratory way? And they're basically the ones saying, hey, why is the whole legal system putting me in jail when the jury is sitting there? The jury, I guess, is sacrosanctum concilium, saying this man should go free. You have to answer to that. And the hermeneutic of continuity is the only way to do so. But you guys, I mean, what's the response? How, if sacrosanctum concilium is clearly so faithful, and yet there's no design before, during, and after the council to use the vagaries in sacrosanctum concilium to do a mass the way that it's done 98% of the time? The Novus Ordo is really desecratory with all these abuses. What's going on then? Why isn't it 98% the other way, usually done in conformity with sacrosanctum concilium?
Well, first of all, you have different parts of sacrosanctum concilium, right? So you have like the theological aspect of what is the liturgy and its importance. And then you have a section that's on, the principles for renewing, right? Or principles for, a renewal of the liturgy. So you'd have to look at the theology part, and then you have to look at the principles of renewal, and then you have to look at what actually happened after the council, and whether it even, first of all, did it even apply the principles or not? A lot of cases it didn't. That's manifestly the case. I mean, the reforms called for in sacrosanctum concilium are not what you see at, like you said, 49 out of 50 parishes. And I'd probably even argue more. I think it's probably 1 out of 1,000.
Well, but why? I mean, the powers that be. Yeah. But this is what I was saying. This is how Vatican II is truly sui generis. There are other pastoral councils, but in all the other pastoral councils, Nicaea, Chalcedon, Constantinople I, Constantinople II, the vagueness and the heresy was coming from the bad guys that the muscle in the church kept tamping down on, and they kept squashing this mole, squashing that mole. 50 years later, you have Chalcedon, then Constantinople, then Ephesus, whatever the order was. I might be reversing them there.
Right.
But it's always the muscle in the church, the magisterium's the good guys. Here, the muscle, and let's take the contrapositive. Robert Cardinal Sarah says, let's do a mass that's more in conformity with sacrosanctum concilium. Let's face Liturgical East 3 years ago. And what happens? Here's your interpretive aid. He gets squashed, and the Vatican comes out the next day. You might begin thinking, that we just pulled the goalie, and the censor bar is just gone, and now the church isn't really watching whether you do it good or you do the mass bad. But no, Robert Sarah tried it, and look, they say sacrosanctum concilium means what the trads say it means. So someone's got to deal with that at some point. We're not going to deal with it here tonight. That's a real problem.
Well, okay, perhaps, yes. I mean, I would agree. I think that in most parishes, the way that the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass is celebrated is horrendous. With church music, I do think that facing east, or facing the same direction, liturgical east, makes the most sense. I happen to be in a region where my apartment is 10 miles or 10 minutes from 3 parishes that have ad orientem novus ordo masses. That's a unique situation. I don't think that there's nothing binding to think that, oh, we're going to make this change in a liturgy that says you have to agree that that's a good change.
No, but I'm just asking why. Why? When there were people at the council that were saying at the Greg, they were meeting at the Greg at night, and they're like, this is what we're going to do with the Mass. We're gonna do this Presbyterian liturgy, right? And then they were like, well, I don't see it in Sacrosanctum Concilium. And then guys like Skilovics are like, no, trust me, we wrote certain parts vaguely enough that we can do this Novus Ordo Seclorum Mass that's going to be basically this Presbyterian awful drivel. And that's what we have. And anytime someone actually does the hermeneutic of continuity, faithful version of the Novus Ordo, they get squashed. One has to answer to that. The trads start sounding really, really right when one deals with that configuration of facts. Again, Chris, do you understand what I'm saying?
I get you. Yeah. I mean, my answer is just unfaithfulness, and it sounds super simple. But I mean, you look at, like, God swears the covenant on the seventh day, boom, Adam and Eve fail. He swears a covenant with Noah, immediately falls into sin. He swears a covenant with Abraham in Genesis 12, boom, he fails, he comes up short. And by the way, with the same thing with Moses, I mean, the people literally, like, almost in a matter of minutes, he swears a covenant with them. Moses gets down from the mountain. He's like, hey guys, and he's like, they're worshiping a golden calf. But the people that were like, hey, it's this Moses figure, like, let's get Moses out of here. We got to rebuild the golden calf, reject the Mosaic covenant. It's the Mosaic covenant's fault. Or with David, 2 Samuel 7, God swears a covenant with David, and all of a sudden David doesn't implement it properly, and he falls. He commits. By the way, many of them were implicated in cover-up. I mean, Moses kills an Egyptian, tries to hide his body in the sand. Adam does the same thing, tries to hide from God. David commits adultery, then tries to cover it up. You have cover-up, sexual misconduct, murder on top of that. So even
you guys are making it more theologically complex.
Let me finish the point real quick. So even after the new covenant, God swears a new covenant with them in the upper room. Immediately, Judas betrays him. Peter doesn't show up to the crucifixion. Everybody bounces except John. Mm-hmm. And then you can go all the way even to the Council of Constance. The Council of Constance convenes, and you can go through. This is just unfaithfulness. And then Martin Luther does his thing, and then you have the Council of Trent. But after the Council of Trent, you have the eldest daughter of the church abandoning her completely, entirely. And you have the Enlightenment. The church didn't hold a council to condemn that. You have the French Revolution, but you don't blame it immediately on the council that came before in terms of Council of Trent. So when you look at
that's not what we're talking about, though.
When you look at two, and you look at, hey, this wasn't, you have all this bad fruit that's coming from it, you have to at least say on a basic level. I mean, you could accuse the institution, you could accuse Moses and David and stuff like that, which would be fair, but ultimately it's not. Ultimately, it's just a problem of the heart. These guys have lost faith and they're unfaithful. And yeah, either the magisterium doesn't do their job, the teaching office of the church doesn't do their job. Ratzinger condemned a lot of people in the process, and the other popes did as well. But at the end of the day, like I'm thinking about here in Los Angeles. I mean, if you want to look at the one place where the liturgy was absolutely abused, look at Los Angeles.
Well, it's everywhere. It's not.
Yeah, it's everywhere. But you have some crazy things that are happening in Los Angeles. Well, yeah, in other places. But I mean,
it's everywhere.
So you look at the unfaithfulness on part of either. It could be priest, it could be bishop, it could be whoever. But for me, it just comes down to these people are unfaithful. They've lost faith, or they're struggling with their faith. And it's the same thing that David suffered from, that Moses suffered from, that Peter suffered from.
Okay, but you're saying they all lost their faith in exactly the same way, and it's not a constellation of power tamping down at all places around the globe with the same equal pressure for anyone that tries to do the Mass in a faithful way, the Novus Ordo Mass in a faithful way. There's so you guys are saying that it's just a coincidence? In 2017 and 2019, All the fancy theological points don't answer for this. Both summers I drove from California to Florida. That's when we found Mississippi and decided we wanted to move here. 2017 and 2019. And no matter where we went to church, dude, it was literally the same bad, happy, clappy boomer Susan from the parish council mass, and it's really garbagey. It's horrible.
Yeah.
How come that's enforced? You're just saying that's a coincidence? That's wild. That would never stand up in court. Is it a coincidence there's not an apparatus of power that's enforcing that continuity from the council? That's wild. No one believes that.
I believe there's bad governance.
Yeah, there's bad governance. Bad implementation.
No, but they said they were going to do that at the council. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but someone has to deal with it.
I have seen Novus Ordo masses celebrated according to the principles of.
I know, but listen to yourself. That's what I'm saying. I've seen it like twice. Cool, but why is it? If the trads say, if there's a hermeneutic of continuity, for one thing, there needs to be this hermeneutic. If it's just continuity, if the Mass is so great, if Sacrosanctum Concilium is so great, we know that when you test it in an Ed Phaser way, dispassionately, okay, technically there's nothing there that says you must do it this way. It's just that there seems to be some preordained agreement, the leadership in the church before, during, and after the council, where you have to receive those words in like an esoteric way, and you have to do it unfaithfully. And there's evidence from the council that you have to do that. I'm just saying we have to start out by admitting that. It's the bailiff. The judge it's emperor's new clothes. The judge read the exact opposite of the verdict. Sacrosanctum Concilium is pretty faithful. And everyone says, yes, these agreed upon, these certain passages mean do it unfaithfully. So again, Taylor Marshall and the trads, who are just mad about that, they're falling into the pitfalls that were set for them, the traps that were sprung for them.
To get back on point, though, what passages say do it unfaithfully?
Well, we don't have I don't have the document in front of us, but no. That's not how it works. I'm not hard pressed to that, because the magisterium of the church for 50 years has said, Sacrosanctum Concilium, the Mass is this way. The power structure of the church has said, do it this way. If you try to face liturgical east, literally the congregation for the clergy comes out and says, no, don't do it that way. You're not allowed to. And it's been consistent, and it's been pretty much equal pressure the whole time. And it's like, oh, maybe they're not watching us from above. Let's try to do a real Mass facing the proper way. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, you haven't tried it in 40 years, but we're still watching. You're still not allowed to do it. It needs to be answered. We're not going to do it here today, but it's a point that needs to be answered. Are we good on that?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I do make distinctions between the teaching office, the sanctifying office, and the ruling office, right? The governance. And so that's an important distinction. And certainly the church makes a lot of poor decisions when it comes to governance sometimes. And there's no obligation to agree with every, disciplinary choice made. And you can strongly disagree with this. And I think you have to in a lot of cases. I literally recently did a post. You probably didn't see it, but on Twitter a week or the last few weeks, I did a tweet that got very little traction. I was disappointed, where I said, hey, how about after all these decades of seeing people not believe in the real presence, that we as the faithful petition the hierarchy to say, hey, can we please outlaw communion in the hand? Because it's done so much damage to the faith. Like, I'm all for that. Yeah. I think it's one of the most detrimental things we've actually seen in the last 40 years.
I know you're for that. I'm just asking, what do you think it means that the church has all but taught the opposite of that? The church has all but taught you're not allowed to face liturgical east. We should outlaw not facing liturgical east during the consecration. Which is one of the most important things. We should outlaw not taking it on the tongue. We should do all these things, but we were being told that it goes appurtenant. It runs with the land of Sacrosanctum Concilium, and they were saying that before, during, and yes, after the councils. So there's something to
it's not. As a theologian, I make a distinction. Those aren't teachings, right? So it's not a doctrinal issue.
No, I'm not saying it's a doctrinal issue.
Yeah, but which is
But that's what the trads say. Now you're just saying what the trads say. Well, and they're saying, but we can disagree with it because it's not a teaching. It's a teaching about a discipline. It is a teaching because it's in a sacred constitution. It's not dogma.
You can't disagree with the fact that the church has the authority to do it. Like the church does have the authority to mandate that you versus populum. You don't have to agree that that decision's a good one.
What we're talking about is what is the meaning of the fact that the church has the authority to dictate a new discipline which is objectively inferior. That's what we're talking about. And a lot of the trads get off board. None of us do, because if the church is just flat out wrong about something that is objectively wrong, then it's all fake, and stick a fork in it. And we realize that a lot of the trads don't. They think there's this way to be an esoteric remnant and all that. It's like, no, indefectibility is really, in some ways, the main mark of the church. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're reasoning about, is what is the meaning or what is the requirement of the fact that the church did bring us into these objectively inferior disciplines.
Yeah, I to highlight that point, Tim, I mean, I think that is the issue, right? And people are looking for that meaning. They're asking that question. And I think that's why a book like Taylor Marshall's does so well, because and I'm not saying I support his thesis or whatever, but I think it's successful precisely because it provides a narrative that explains, why we're in the situation that we're in, and it only sells really well precisely because of the crisis and that people are looking for an answer. And sometimes the typical answer, like, hey, covenant unfaithfulness. It was there in Adam. It was there in Moses. It was there in Abraham. It was there in Noah. It was there in It was there in Peter. It was there in Judas. It was there in David. It was there. You could go on and on, right? So so that simple answer of, hey, it's just the fact that maybe people have lost their faith and they're unfaithful, and people are like, nah. There has to be something much more coordinated for it to be on this grand scale. And the problem is, though, in a hierarchy like we're in the Catholic Church, when you have one person, when you have one bishop who's unfaithful, who's unfaithful to the covenant, has lost faith or losing their faith, then it affects like millions of people in their diocese, in the case of LA or something. So I think that I think sometimes the simpler solution is literally what the scriptures tell us, rather than, a grand theme of infiltration or something like that. I think, people are, I think you're right. That's the question that everybody's asking, which is...
It's a question everyone should be asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, people like us.
What's the meaning of this?
Asking. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and the trads kind of ask it too. They just don't like distinctions. And what we need are not just distinctions, but distinctions within distinctions within distinctions. Again, to defend Marshall's thesis in infiltration a bit, he's not abstracting from just like the fact that two bishops somewhere in two parts of the world require that the mass is done in a really desecratory way. It's like if there are 10,000 bishops in the world, like 9,985 of them, over 99% of them, require the mass to be done in an unfaithful way in precisely the same parts of the mass. It is strongly evidentiary, if not dispositive, of some sort of collusion, or it would just be the world's biggest coincidence. In other words, if you're disputing that, Chris, then you would be the teacher who at 2:57, all of your students drop their binder on the floor at exactly 2:57, and you're like, that must have been a coincidence, right? That's you. Well, if you don't admit. Now we're
talking about the promulgation of the new mass. So if we're talking about liturgical abuses, then we're talking about the wide-scale promulgation of the Novus Ordo, which in which you see all of these, and so that's why why you're seeing such widespread abuse is because you have a new mass where many priests aren't being checked for some of the stuff that they're making up, and then you just have a complete rejection of it. So you again, it goes back to this top. It's like, well, Paul VI was the one who promulgated this thing, and so even though you're seeing all this stuff, it's like, why did this happen all throughout the world? It's because we're in a monarchy, and one person had promulgated this mass, and so
The Pope never told people to hold hands at the Our Father, though.
All throughout.
No, and that is a liturgical abuse.
Right, but I mean, but it's 2:57. All the kids drop their pencil. All the kids drop their binder. Chris, it sounds like you're saying it's just a coincidence, or it's just individual bishops lost their faith in the exact same way at 2:57, and it just doesn't. It doesn't have the.
I mean, I think it's spread through seminaries and houses of formation and universities.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why. I mean,
why?
Honestly.
But why? Why, and what's the meaning of it? And more important than any of it, why is it allowed from the top? And more important than any of it, what is the connection to the deliberations? In Congress, we'd call it the committee council's note.
I mean, Sacrosanctum Concilium itself expressly forbids. It says, therefore, no other person, even if he be a priest, may add, remove, or change anything in the liturgy on his own authority. Why has that been ignored is a really good question.
Yeah.
Because in most places, it's not being celebrated according to the proper rubrics.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a very good question.
Right, but it's bound up ontologically in the fact that there was a change in the Mass. There's strong evidence that there's something like, okay, when we change it, we'll write this document that's mostly pretty faithful, but by virtue of the fact that it's a new form of a Mass, no one will know what to recognize. We're just going to do it all at the exact same time in the exact same way in completely desecratory ways, and they'll never know because 99% of the faithful are never going to read Sacrosanctum Concilium. So that's what I mean by codified heteropraxy. It's not heterodoxy. It's not even a teaching, like you say, right, Richard, but it's codified heteropraxy. And they were talking about this at the council. They're like, we're doing a new Mass. That's gonna mess up everyone's world. And so they're not even going to know what to expect. They couldn't do that with the TLM because all the old Italian grandmas know what to expect at exactly that part. With a novelty, people aren't going to know. The only people that know are people like us three who read the documents, and most of the trads don't read the documents either.
I think which would technically mean that they knew that the people wouldn't know that they weren't even following the rules. Yeah.
Sure, but it is linked to the codified heteropraxy is linked to some weak spots in not only Sacrosanctum Concilium, but there's some soft ground there that they pushed on, and I mean we're talking about it when we talk about like Nostra Aetete and we talk about Gaudium et Spes. There are some soft spots that they intentionally softened the ground in the drafting and the ratification, and then they did push on those spots. But let's go on. I mean, we don't have to go through all these in detail. I'm kind of repeating myself. My third point was I was just saying, you were like, none of us have the charism of infallibility. Taylor does because he's grinning, chuckling, and laughing. I mean, it's not
what I said.
What'd you say?
I didn't say that Taylor does. I said.
No. You don't think Taylor's infallible.
No, and I didn't say that tongue-in-cheek. I said none of us, me, Chris, or Taylor, do have that charism.
Sure.
What I said was, I just as a something I worry about, because I brought this up again at the end of the video, which is, Nicomachean ethics, right? You can fail by virtue, either by privation or excess, right? Sure. So you darn well know that in pretty much every virtue, there are people that Satan leads to one extreme or the other.
Sure.
Right? And if you were going to see someone be led by Satan by excess instead of privation when it comes to an ecumenical council and the teachings of the magisterium, what would it look like? And I'm saying that someone becomes so far to one side that they take delight in pointing out errors of the magisterium, that they're so excited at the fact that they're right and the church is wrong, that it manifests itself in glee, that to me, that's a spiritual discernment issue that needs to be addressed. I said that actually out of concern, because I have seen this happen to many people. They start, somewhere towards the center, and then they slowly drift far and far away. I have relatives that went way off the deep end and went even well beyond the SSPX at one point. Luckily, they came back, but it was a dark place. So I've seen people follow that path and drift away and end up, when Lumen Gentium says that you cannot, if you know the church was established by Christ, and yet as necessary for salvation, and refuse to join or remain in her, you have no hope of salvation. And the Radtrads know that the church was established by that, and some of them seem to be leaning towards not remaining in.
Sure. I mean, just
so
there are other reasons. There are other reasons I'm just saying for myself, half the time when we were making TNT video, it's kind of if you don't laugh, you cry sort of thing.
Okay.
I just don't like in Catholicism how everyone's moralistic. I mean, like if you're leveling a critique and like, hey man, this seems really absurd to me, and you're laughing, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily rooting for the downfall of the church, but it might be a spiritual discernment thing. It's not that important a point. I don't think it's that important a point either way. I don't really care if someone, at the end of the day, this is why ultimately I guess I favor your guys' point of view. If I were the judge, I'd say, yeah, what you guys were saying in your video about the documents is what I care about. I don't care about whether someone's laughing as they say it, or because there's a million things that could be motivating that, right? And if we, that's fine. You disagree, and it's cool. I'm sick of Catholics moralizing to each other. That's what we need to do, is be textualists, get into documents. What does the document say? What's required by the meaning of the document? And let's quit playing Emperor's New Clothes and quit chiding each other about like tone or charity or any of that stuff, because I don't know. I mean, I know when I did videos with Taylor, a lot of times we were laughing about how absurd the church has become, and it's not because we're rooting for it. It's because if you don't laugh, you cry. But I get what you're saying. I guess I'm defending myself more than anything, because I laugh a lot when something seems absurd, and a lot seems absurd in the church. Is that gel with you, Chris, or what do you think?
Yeah.
Fourth point, you said you doubt. I forget which one of you said you doubt that dialogue has been refused to the trads, because Lefebvre had lots of chances at dialogue. That's actually true. I actually like that point. But then I would say maybe more the modern traditionalists are pretty much getting slighted. I mean, look at even someone like Cardinal Sarah, right? He just wants the Mass said faithfully, and then look at Father what's his face, Martin, right? He goes around. Look at the disparity of treatment. So I think that's.
I agree with you on that. And I did say in the video, to be fair to myself, I did say maybe on individual bishops' levels, and maybe even widespread. I would say there's a lot of dioceses that before the motu proprio refused anyone to even consider offering the Latin Mass.
Right.
And I agree with you there. I do think that's a problem. I don't think that they're being taken seriously on the local level. They're not being taken seriously, sometimes even at seminaries. They can be put down and kind of just dogged and just called rigid, and I think that's wrong. I don't think they deserve the attention of their pastors as much as anyone else. So I would agree with you on that point. I don't think they're being treated fairly in many places. So that's a good point.
Yeah, and so it's not so much the dialogue. Well, I mean, I do think that the dialogue is most often refused. I do also think that Lefebvre got the benefit of tons and tons and tons of patience and dialogue. And again, just shouldn't have signed those documents, and probably should have caucused more efficaciously against the documents, because I have lots of problems with lots of points in the documents myself, even though I'm a hermeneutic of continuity guy. Caucus more effectively, do more at the council, so you could do less later, instead of the opposite. But I do know some of the most faithful men I've ever met went to the seminary and were turned away, whereas they're really bringing through lots of homosexuals and libs. That seems to be a widespread thing. Okay, this one is loving. I think Chris said something about loving tradition, but also loving Vatican II, which a lot of traditionalists would say you can't do. I don't know. It's kind of a softball. What do you say to that? Can you love tradition and can you love Vatican II? I mean, really love the essence of both, given what we said about the need for a hermeneutic of continuity?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an obvious point. Now, you know me, I'm a more rah guy for Vatican II. I try to hold back a bit, given your taking your advice a bit. But I do think that Vatican II had recovered the primacy of scripture and tradition in Dei Verbum. And Dei Verbum is one of the constitutions, obviously. It's like the document in which you interpret all the others. The Christological focus brought forth this emphasis on scripture and tradition. So, I mean, if you love tradition, you should love Dei Verbum, and the emphasis that the other documents try to apply, given Dei Verbum, going back to scripture. I mean, look how many times scripture is cited in Vatican II, in the Vatican II documents. Look how many times the Church Fathers are cited. You know, one of the challenges that the Trent had was, first of all, calling the council in Trent. It didn't have a library. Charles V had to bring a library over. They had to bring, I think maybe even Francis, the emperor, the King of France, had to bring his library too, because you're dealing with highly complex theological issues. You have to go back to scripture and tradition and so on and so forth. But what you get at Vatican II is an emphasis on scripture and tradition, because you have them cited everywhere in the footnotes, even in the pages. They're quoted consistently throughout the document. So, I mean, it just seems like an obvious point. Don't know what the debate is, other than the fact that obviously after the council, with the change in the liturgy, you have different accidental properties of the mass changed, of course, which, you know, some are good, some are bad, maybe. I mean, that gets into a whole other issue. I mean, even with the new, if you know, the other issue that we haven't talked about, is a whole nother show, is the new lectionary, because the new lectionary sort of sets up the new mass, but the new lectionary emphasizes that with the emphasis on scripture, which is a whole other issue to debate. But yeah, I think that it's an obvious point. I don't know what somebody would contest. I'd be willing to listen to them and hear them out and give my response. But it's obvious to me that scripture and tradition was you know, the central focus of the council.
I've never heard a trad angry about Dei Verbum, and I've never really heard any Catholic of any stripe saying scripture and tradition. Well, I'm just saying, yeah. I mean, maybe
because my dissertation's on that topic, so I've encountered it there. But yeah,
but that's grad school. That's a whole other thing. I mean, in the real world,
wasn't as good as they think. But anyway,
yeah. No, I mean that's true. And also, I mean, Pius X is the one that really did the radical reform to the breviary, which is kind of hilarious, given the worshipfulness. He's one of my favorite popes too, but the worshipfulness of him, that counts as kind of proto-liturgical reform, and it does go hand in hand with it, like you're saying about the lectionary. Pius X. Pius X is the one that reformed the breviary. I don't know about, you're saying Pius XII did the lectionary.
No, there's other vernacular changes and stuff like that. But, you know, one of the interesting things about the Council of Trent was the Council of Trent left open the use for the vernacular. So because Cajetan and there were others that were advocating for the use of the vernacular in Germany. And the council was like, no, we're not going to do this, but we're going to leave open the possibility for the vernacular. But right now, we're just going to say that you can't say that Latin's bad, because that's what the Lutherans were sort of saying. But there were many people that were saying, hey, we should allow the Lutherans as like a, you know, a sort of a reach across the aisle. We should allow them to celebrate it in the vernacular. And many of them, that's why Trent left it open. They left it open for a possible future discussion. All they did was say you can't condemn the Latin being used. And so, yeah, eventually you have different popes that are like, okay, we'll add a little vernacular here or there. And then obviously after Vatican II, you have it added a lot. But that's different from the actual Sacrosanctum Concilium. But it's another point to.
Yeah. Chris, you said point number 6. You understand why Barron would refuse dialogue with Marshall. That I just recoiled any of that. This refusing dialogue is gay. It is the worst. So when X refuses dialogue with Y, and I mean, it's just of any stripe, right? You know, if Barron refuses dialogue with Marshall, or Marshall refuses dialogue with Barron, or whatever. I don't know if either of you reached out to
I think
Marshall. Did either of you reach out to Marshall before, during, or after the making of this video?
Yeah, I texted him and I told him that I'd be willing to do. Well, what's interesting first is, Timothy Flanders had invited me to come on and do a debate. And so I didn't know who that was going to be. We never ended up setting that up because I've discussed with him on his show the scholastic method and the retrieval of the scholastic method in Dei Verbum. But I didn't hear back from Timothy Flanders, but I did reach out to Taylor after the video and just sort of said, I'd be open if he wants to do a dialogue or something on his show or somebody else's. I'd be willing to. It doesn't have to be a formal debate. I mean, exactly what you're doing. I mean, you're coming at us pretty strong from a different point of view and just having this discussion. I mean, it could even be, honestly, all three of us, Flanders and Taylor, and make it sort of a roundtable discussion. I mean, it wouldn't be a formal debate, but if that's how, if they feel comfortable doing something like that, it'd be fine. I reached out to him. I've made it clear, when I was back on Twitter, that I was always willing to debate any of these issues, not on Twitter, but on a, podcast or something like that. But to your other point, what was the other point? I was going to say.
I was just saying, you just said you understand why Aaron would refuse. Refusing dialogue is gay. And it's for the
can understand. I said, I actually, to be clear, I said that he should. I wish that Barron and Marshall could sit down, or somebody else debate Marshall, or I am all in favor of that. All I said was, as in a passing comment, I understand probably why. I probably know why he probably doesn't want to debate him. That's my only point. I'm all for. I'm the one who said that we need to call the Synod and draw this out to the light and really actually.
Why would Barron not want to? Because he'll lose, or because what?
You can lose a debate without losing the arguments.
No, I honestly think that
people popular when you have a popular audience, we see it in presidential debates all the time, right? I mean, it's not always the person who makes the actual logical arguments that wins. It's the one who wins over the rhetorical force.
No, but like Tim, so Tim, you and
I don't know. I think there can be some juridical issues with that. I mean, he's a bishop. He's an auxiliary bishop in California. Debating someone in a different diocese and different parish might be a juridical issue as far as correcting. But if it's just a dialogue, yeah, I think they should have a dialogue. I don't think refusing dialogue is good either.
I think what they should do is actually.
Chris just said it sympathetically. I didn't know what you meant, and I had no.
Look,
he's a couple internet personalities. Let's not get all sanctimonious. Just if an internet personality is saying A and another one's saying A prime, come on, get it together, mix it up, man. Like it just need to be some more red blood.
Do some more sparring, man.
Yeah, do some more sparring. Come on, let's not. Fine, I get it. I think Richard, you said this point 7. I'm quoting you directly. Mm-hmm. I think this is really fair. And note how I'm always just for directness. You said, quote, Taylor does a pretty poor job from an academic perspective at parsing the documents. And that's really where your guys' strength in your video was. I think all the characterizations you're doing in the first 45 minutes, I think that's what I'm bringing to your attention here. The characterizations, I think there's a lot of room for wrestling. But except, when you're just saying does a poor job from an I mean, I don't know how one gets around saying adding a word a la Martin Luther and saying the one true God. That's a you're calling it a poor job from an academic perspective. And even though this is a more direct affront to the Taylor Marshall video, and I've defended him on most of these other points, I think this is your guys' wheelhouse in that video, which people should all go watch. And that
was actually the main impetus for the video. Like
I know
50-minute intro was sort of accidental in the sense of that part wasn't really. I wanted to talk about some general issues, but I mean that was the main impetus was how poorly I thought it was done, and anyway.
And that's where you're being most direct and probably most offensive. And I've been defending, I guess, Marshall's position on a lot of these characterizational aspects of Vatican II, and just trying to, I guess, throw a semi-traditional perspective at you guys, just my own. I'm my own man, and yet that's where you can stand on really firm ground, terra firma, and be like, dude, the text says this. I got it right here. I got the text. It says this. It doesn't say true God. You said he should be more careful. He should take more care in the interpretive act, or something like that. I'm like, this is Tim Gordon's style. I just like being direct and saying, hey, look at the text. And you were saying that there. So that was point number 7. I'm not one of these guys that just reacts emotively. This is you being most noxious, most directly affronting. And even though I've defended, I guess, his general mien in some other points, this most direct affront, I think, is the most defensible. Then shortly thereafter, you repeated, I think, Richard, you said that, quote, Taylor's trying to spread a doubt. And, there's all of this credentialing argument among internet guys like us. I'm a philosopher. Taylor's a philosopher. What philosophers do is they make arguments. I never claim to be a theologian. I'm a philosopher and legally trained, an attorney. So when philosophers make arguments, and you're saying, oh, he's trying to spread a doubt, it's like, well, I mean, if his position is that a doubt should be had here, without reaching the merits of whether he's right or wrong, which is where you're in your wheelhouse and you're strong, I'm not up for the motives. I mean, if he thinks that one ought to have a doubt, that might be a negative thing magisterially, juridically, canonically, blah, 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 blah. But still, he's just making an argument, right? So you should show.
We can't approach. See, this is where my theologian background differs with that, because when you're talking about matters of magisterial authority, that's a completely different thing. This isn't casting a doubt about the meaning of some literature book that we read in English class. This is casting doubt intentionally about binding magisterial teachings. And if you're going to do that, you better darn well be very careful. And to not be, I think, is a dereliction of duty.
Well, we have to be, I guess we have to be even more specific here, though I think it's kind of boring. I mean, I raised the point, so it's my fault. But no, but there's lots of, places where we're saying yes. And this is what I really wanted to get to, is Chris found this section where Paul VI, trads misquote this all the time, and you're pointing this out. I think Taylor misquotes it. Trads are always saying, oh, Paul VI says, oh, you can take or leave Vatican II because it's a pastoral council. One, there are other councils that are pastoral councils. Two, Chris, I don't know if you have Paul VI saying that. He does say this is an act of the ordinary magisterium, and it does need to be obeyed. Even if all we're talking about are disciplines, wear the tonsure. Let's pretend Vatican II said every priest in the world has to wear the tonsure. Even though that is not irreformable, that's a reformable teaching. Mm-hmm. If you got these guys over here, let's say it was Archbishop Lefebvre, they're saying, we're not going to wear the tonsure. It's like, okay, this issue, you don't get to balk at it just because it's not irreformable. It's an issue of obedience, and that is adherence to formal adherence to an attitude of schism or whatever, whether or not they're schismatic. If you just say, no, I'm not going to do that, it's like, it doesn't matter whether or not it's reformable or it's dogma or it's irreformable. What matters is that it's a direct order from the king, who all these LARPs say they only think, the king should be the only form of government, a monarchy. Well, this is the one that is a monarchy, and they won't obey. So I think it's a good point.
The only one with divine, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just defending, hey, if he sees a doubt, then speak it out.
Here's where I would agree with you. If this was taking place in a faculty room or amongst scholars who are really trying to wrestle with something, and say, hey, I don't understand this, I don't see it, that's different. But when if you're casting out to a general audience that's not educated on these things, and you're almost relying on the fact that they don't know the text that well either, and then you're trying to win that audience over to your position, that's something completely different than scholars trying to hash out disagreements or go through difficulties. And that's
sure,
where...
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But I mean, yeah, then it's a whole other video. I half the time I just want to say this and then get it out there. There is a problem with this idea of religious submission of the mind and the intellect. Because you can't explicate a false logoi, right? I can't explain to you how 2 and 2 are 5. So there is this problem that needs to be unpacked by like Lumen Gentium, whatever it is, 25. How do we, if something is reformable because ultimately it's objectively inferior, like the new Mass, which will be reformed in the future, I'm 100% certain. Doesn't mean Vatican II is a sham. It just means they tried it. It was bad. It was a discipline. They have the authority to do that. We have to assent and say that they can do that. But when it comes to the quasi-doctrines being bandied about in things like Dignitatis Humanae, it's like quasi-doctrine. And I don't have any problem with Dignitatis Humanae. I think it's the most defensible of all the sacred constitutions at the council. But when it's stuff like Gaudium et Spes that's quasi-doctrine, it's like, well, if we're dealing with a point that's really soft and squishy, how do we demand religious submission? Because in order to do it, we have to know it first. In order to will it, the will is what loves something and submits to something that one loves. You have to know it first, right? You got to know it to do it. So, and if it's because you can't explicate a false logoi, I would defend the kind of trad general position that's like, so is this doctrine or discipline? There's a lot that's kind of in between in those Vatican documents. There's both. Yeah. And the religious assent, which falls somewhere between dogma that's infallible and that first level that like Cardinal Newman talks about, to have the second and the third level really seem squishy and seem like you're demanding that one be able to love and explicate a false logoi. But I don't know. We're not going to solve it here. I don't know. I just don't think trying to spread a doubt, if it's a doubt about like not the validity of the new Mass, but like which I did this lots on Rules for Retrogrades and on TNT with Marshall. It's like, yeah, I think people should all write letters to their bishop every day. We want the old Mass. It's objectively better. It's not a matter of emotivism. It's just a matter of it's much holier. It puts us in the proper disposition. And they should doubt, why do we need a Novus Ordo? I think that's a defensible instance of trying to spread a doubt. It's because I believe it philosophically and I'm putting it across to people. But that's not exactly what you were critiquing either. So I guess maybe I'm putting myself in Taylor's.
You, for example, saw like there's something that the Council of Trent teaches that seems to be in tension with something Paul says, let's say in Romans. How do you handle that situation? You either try to solve it on an academic level, you try to reach out to someone who knows Scripture really well and knows what the Council of Trent taught and can help you solve it. And if you can't solve it, it doesn't mean that you, one, give up on the faith. It's faith-seeking understanding. And two, you never get to a point where you go on and you say, hey, guys, I found this tension between something in the Council of Trent and something that Paul says in Romans. And because it doesn't match up with Romans, I therefore think the Council of Trent is wrong. And let me do a video says the errors of Council of Trent on blank, 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 and then try to convince people that there are errors. That's
when before Vatican II. So if you're going to be a traditionalist, when before the Second Vatican Council would it ever been appropriate for a layman to publicly decry an ecumenical council and call it erroneous?
Right. They would say, well, the need arose uniquely there, and then we get into the merits. So it's kind of a toss-up. But I mean, these are fair. I think these are fair comebacks you guys are making. As someone that's legitimately not in like a contrived way, I'm legitimately probably about halfway between you. I think there are a lot of fair rejoinders you're coming up with here. DeClue, you said. Point number 9, you said, Taylor said, we're still debating Vatican II, which was so long ago. And you said, dude, look at church history. They're debating, Nicaea or Chalcedon 200 years afterwards. And I thought that was a strong point. Now, the rejoinder that I don't, this is not Taylor's rejoinder. I think it's mine. It's my clever rejoinder is, Yeah, but the ambiguity there was coming from the bad guys that the authorities were tamping down
But
on.
no one
Here
knew
it's
they
coming
were
from
bad
the
guys
authorities.
until after the councils. Did you know Nestorius was the bad guy until he lost?
No, but the church didn't affirm him ever. I mean, the church was
They
not
both
enforcing
appealed
this
to Nicaea.
weird mass. The church was not coming down on Cardinal Sarah and propping up.
Right,
you know,
but okay, first of
guys
all,
that-
I need to stop it right there as far as that goes, because one thing I did not do, because this video was specifically on the points that Taylor Marshall raised. I'm not defending bad liturgies. I'm not defending weak bishops who don't control things going on, like heresy being preached from the pulpit, and don't control liturgical abuses. And I'm not defending every change made to the liturgy since the Second Vatican Council. So to me, that's not. I attend the traditional mass every Sunday and sometimes during the week. So I'm not defending everything that bishops have done since the council,
right.
because there's a lot of bad that's been done.
You said that. You said that once.
Yeah. So I'm not. That's not really. That's not an area that I'm arguing.
Sure, but it does have a bearing. If we had the time, maybe in another show or something, it does have a bearing on the argument about what are the requirements by the fact that the church has the authority to do these things, even though they're objectively inferior. I don't have the answer. I honestly don't think either of you do either. What I will say is that trads don't have the categories for guys like you or really me. They don't have the categories because it's like, wait, this guy goes to Latin Mass all the time, yet he's defending the hermeneutic of continuity. I think I have I'm not saying it's utterly unique, but I have this understanding of what a hermeneutic is that is like, okay, there were other councils that were pastoral. There aren't other councils where you needed this hermeneutic of continuity, which was a serious massager. I don't think that the rad trads understand why one would say that, and at the same time be like, okay, but the Novus Ordo, however inferior, is valid. I just don't think. Another point I wanted to give you guys props was, you kept saying, Richard, Vatican II is binding on Catholics even if non-infallible. I've been making this point since Easter, right, when we got into the trad wars or whatever. If the Vatican says at a council, a disciplinary council, and again, there are 3 or 4 of them, if the Vatican says, wear the hair in a tonsure, all the clerics of the world, then everyone has to do it. Or else if you're like, no, I'm not going to do that, then you're breaking the vow of obedience, which all of these guys take. You were saying that.
Yeah, and if you only obey, there's just a general point. If you only obey when you agree, then you're only obeying yourself, which is not obedience at all.
True, but that's a will thing. That's like to obey when you want to have sugar, but okay, I'm going to obey the order not to have sugar because that's just my will. When it's an intellect thing and it is like a borderline contradiction that seriously is a pitfall made and written in some of the documents to look like a contradiction, and you're like, but my principle of non-contradiction for my natural reason is, like rebelling. That's a little. This is again where I'm more sympathetic the other way. Can we just say I wanted to give you guys props on those 2 points. Chris, you said another council or synod should issue clarification for all these vagaries. I totally agree. That's what we need. That's what, as a loyal son of the church, a faithful son of the church, I'm waiting for. I think, Richard, you're waiting for. Chris, I guess you're waiting for it. I was happy to hear you say that. I think we need clarification, and also we need to admit that until we get that clarification on the real weak spots, which we're not addressing in fine now, that's why we need a hermeneutic, right? We don't really.
This is a point that you remember at the Council of Constance, by the way, they issued that they decreed that councils were to be called every 10 years to deal with issues. Now, in the Middle Ages, you have, I think it's around 30 years that you average a council every 30 years. What happens after, and this might be the reason why we might have lost the West, because there are a lot of issues we could have dealt with had we had one. We don't have a council after Trent for 300 years.
What was happening during that time was the Enlightenment.
Oh, I know.
Really
it's like, what is the council? You have to wait till Vatican I, and Vatican I has to define something, but it's almost too late because Trent never talked about the papacy. that was the one issue. And even people afterwards were like, man, why we should have addressed the whole papacy issue, because that's Luther's big thing. But fast forwarding to now I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Oh, the council. Yeah. So you have to wait 300 years. And the way I see it is Trent was a generation, and too late. I mean, the Emperor Charles was the one who was like, hey, this is affecting the political stability of the West. Bishops, Pope, he has to twist their arms. And by the way, in the first session, the first people that show up, you have like 20 guys out of 700 bishops that are even that can come. Only 20 guys, around 20 guys, I think the most was 28, show up. And they're like, okay, let's deal with this issue. None of the bishops from the German lands show up, at least at the beginning, where the issue's taking place. And Charles was like, hey, we got to deal with this. And finally, and then it takes 16 years. And at that point, you have the third generation of Lutherans. And so you have Protestants then that infiltrate into the West, and we end up losing it in the French Revolution and so on. And we're in the mess that we're in. But right now, I think that this issue with SSPX needs to be addressed. I mean, we're in the second generation of SSPXers and people that are really calling for the removal of the Second Vatican Council. If the church doesn't, I understand that Pope Benedict and John Paul II were trying to reach out, but I think that we need to hold exactly. I mean, they were begging the Lutherans to come to the Council of Trent, and I think they did show up for a little bit, but they were just worried that Luther or one of them was going to get burned at the stake or something. But I think that we need to call a synod or a council and have the representatives of the SSPX, the bishops and their representatives, show up, and we need to have them give their 2 cents, and the church needs to give her 2 cents and deal with this issue. Because if we don't, we're going to have a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh generation of SSPXers.
Yeah, but the authorities in the church like that. This is where the weaponized ambiguity comes in. They know that among the faithful, conservative-minded people in the church, this is the way to ensnare them. Well, I think Richard said this at the beginning when he made the point with Aristotelian virtue. This is my whole point. The bad guys are the ones using the weaponized ambiguity in the church, and all the people that are really have a will toward tradition in the church, the traditionalists, aptly so named, they're the ones, if you just enable the ambiguity to continue unabated and weaponized, then they'll keep tearing each other up with these purity spirals the way they do, and kind of seem like you're doing talks with them, like the Vatican did with, Mueller did with Fillet in 2016, 2017, and then let it go to nothing, and then just continue on with a deafening silence, allow the weaponized ambiguity to shred all the people. Again, the weaponized ambiguity is coming from the church. It's coming from Francis. It came from several of the popes before, during, and after the council. So that's why, again, you can't escape saying that the church, the leadership in the church, is really to blame for all of this. It's not just that they're refusing dialogue to the trads and they're trying to be good to the trads on the other side. They're using the traditionalists against the traditional points of view that are valid, if overstated or outsized. Chris, can we close with, because this has gone way too long, can we close with you reading the Paul VI line or paragraph where he says obedience is necessary because this is an ordinary act. Vatican II is an ordinary act of the authentic magisterium of the church.
Yeah, 1966, he gets done saying it's not extraordinary magisterium, and then he goes on, but it, brackets the council, has invested its teaching with the authority of the supreme ordinary magisterium. And I love what he says next, which ordinary magisterium is so obviously authentic. Obviously. I mean, he's making the point that this should be obvious because it's an ecumenical council. Which ordinary magisterium is so obviously authentic that it must be accepted with docility and sincerity by all the faithful, according to the mind of the council as expressed in the nature and aims of the individual documents.
Wow. I mean,
it's a supreme ordinary magisterium.
That's crazy. We're always told by trads, there are all these trad talking points that aren't true. There's only one pastoral council, not true. St. Michael's prayer, its origin is this talking point I used for years, and I found out it's not true. I always heard that Paul VI said, trads always say, Paul VI said, you can take Vatican II or leave it. You're not really disobedient. if you hate Vatican II, I'm not a fan, but I'll go along as far as I have to go along to still be obedient. And he says it really clearly there that one cannot just, brand yourself, bro. If you like Vatican II, you're a Vatican II Catholic. If you don't, then you're a pre-Vatican II Catholic. This is where a lot of the kind of neo-Protestantism enters the traditional quarters of the church, where they're like, brand yourself. Which of the 39,000 brands of Protestant or Catholic are you? Are you a pre, a during, a post-Vatican II Catholic? No, we all have to accept it because the hermeneutic of continuity abides, and we don't have a choice. Richard, you want to close there? So someone bring us out with a parting shot, because we're way over time.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, there are different levels of assent required, and the lowest level to ordinary magisterial teaching, such as an authentic magisterium, actually means authoritative. That's what the term authentic means in those contexts, in theological terms, is obsequium. It's a religious submission of will and intellect. And I typically think of it as a deference, that if I'm having a hard time with a magisterial teaching, I have to, you have to assume that the magisterium is right and you're wrong. Because, and with the traditionalists, you have to be careful, because the argument, we don't have to agree with the Second Vatican Council, or we don't have to defer to it, is the same argument the liberals made with regards to things like Humanae Vitae and Ornatio Sacerdotales.
Right.
It's not an act of the supreme magisterium. We can take it or leave it. And you don't want to go down the path of the only thing Catholics have to agree with is on absolutely solemnly defined dogmas.
That's right.
That's not a way forward. Most magisterial texts are not infallible definitions.
Right.
So you don't want to go down that path. It would obliterate tradition.
Right. That's almost what a lot of trads who were on my side when I debated Trent Horn were saying that to him. Dude, dogmas aren't the only thing that are perennial. Dogmas aren't the only thing that are that make us Catholic, right? And right. They were on my side as against Trent Horn last fall, whatever it was, last fall. But except now, when it comes to Vatican II, they kind of flip flop. Guys, thanks for coming on. I think it's been instructive. We are three guys that accept the hermeneutic of continuity. We have differing levels of enthusiasm for Vatican II. I'm the least. I'm, I guess, the most trad, but I'm with you on the hermeneutic of continuity because I'm Catholic. I can't not be, unless the only real position would be sedevacantism, right? Unless you're just going to take that Paul VI quote and say he's not the supreme pontiff, and the council was a fake council, and the church isn't indefectible. Forget the fact that it was pastoral. We already know that. There are other councils that were pastoral. I don't have a choice. So I might have a different level, a lower level of enthusiasm than Chris, my buddy. But at the end of the day, it's you're either Catholic or not Catholic. And while there are some real issues, the main one is, what is the meaning of the fact that the church can do these disciplinary things which are not as good objectively and take some strange looking positions? We have to scratch our head at them until the next council. And until then, I remain your humble host, Timothy Gordon, Chris Plance, Richard DeClue. Thank you guys for coming on. I think you comported yourself and you acquitted your position really nobly. And hopefully there can be some more dialogue going forward if some more people are able to view this via my channel. Thank you, guys.
That'd be great. Thanks for providing it.
Thanks, bro.
Peace.